Hi, my name's Andy Schmuckler. Um, I'm a, I call say about myself sometimes these days that I'm a man on a mission, because that's how it feels, and it's a pretty ambitious mission. It's to get out into the world, into as many minds as I can, what I call a better human story, um, which I actually do believe could help human civilization survive. Uh, I'm going to be making a video on my chutzpah problem, but that making that kind of claim in public is indicative of the chutzpah problem. But anyway, my hope is that people will check it out, would be interested enough to check it out, and that can be done through the videos that I'm making. Some of them deal with that, and it can be checked out also on my website, which is abetterhumanstory.org, where there's a variety of ways of checking it out. And I think you'll find that I deliver those goods. One of the things which is important about this Better Human Story is that it puts a lot of pieces together, uh, enough so that it it would require somebody to actually take on as a project to go through the various pieces to see that there's a coherent picture here with various dimensions of the human story. And um, I've spent my life looking at what everybody else has had to say. And um, I think this is a contribution that needs to be absorbed, because I think it's a toss-up whether human civilization is going to survive uh, the next several, not so many generations, or whether we're going to destroy ourselves through nuclear holocaust or environmental destruction. But anyway, I call it an integrative vision. Um, Seeing things whole has been something I've been working to do since I was in my mid-teens, and now I'm in my late 70s, as incredible as that is for me to acknowledge. But looking at things realistically, uh, I feel like the mission I'm on is to get it out as much as I can before I kick the bucket, which um, there's just too much evidence that that can't be too far into the future. Uh, that's disturbing for me to contemplate, but it also means that I don't have a lot of time to get this done. So I'm willing to have the chutzpah to say whatever it is that I think is true, whether it makes me look, like I got too much whatever, or not. Um, but anyway, since there is an integrative quality to this big picture, I thought it might be useful for me to try in some conversational way to indicate some of the various things that go into this thing, which I say is all integrated. They're all part of the same thing, an evolutionary perspective on, what it means to be the creatures that we are, created this civilization on this planet after 3.5 billion years of life evolving, without there being anything that's basically been shaped by the inventiveness of a creature that has enough creative intelligence to extricate itself from the niche in which it evolved biologically. I'm not going to go into all that, but the the picture, I'm going to just sort of lay out some pieces now. It begins with that book back there, or the idea that gave rise to that book. That's the book called The Parable of the Tribes, The Problem of Power and Social Evolution. it challenges the secular worldview that we have now, in that it tells that we haven't looked at the implications of the step that our species took that was unprecedented in the history of life. And it has enormous implications. And I'm kind of surprised that this hasn't been noted previously, but I'm not going to go into that because I don't have any real insight into why that is. But I think I can prove various things that the secular worldview should absorb from the idea of how we unleashed a social evolutionary force, inevitably, that wasn't a function of human nature, but was a function of the dynamics of the system. So there's the main dimension of this better human story actually derives from seeing the nature of the systemic forces that arise and how they play out over time. So what I claim to be able to prove is something about that inevitable social evolutionary force, which makes clear a couple of things that I like to use to indicate this is what the implications are, because I think it should give a signal that if our secular worldview did absorb this into its way of understanding things, it could have a beneficial effect. But anyway, one of those statements is, the ugliness we see in human history is not human nature writ large. That basically means if I say I can prove that, I can prove that we are better creatures than we have thought ourselves to be. And I think it's probably intuitively obvious why, if we did see ourselves as better creatures than we have been seeing ourselves, that we're taught by our culture to see ourselves, that could have a beneficial effect. And I would say it's got two beneficial effects. One is we tend to live up or down to our expectations of ourselves. And if we can slough off the burden that our culture has put on us with original sin and all the other stuff that's come with it, we would be fortified. And if we can envision, we see that ourselves as creatures who are capable of operating a civilization on a planet like this that is more whole, more viable, more conducive to human thriving. If we can see that we are capable of doing that, that's pretty important. Also, we should recognize that all this is true because of a second statement, which is that I say that I can prove that any creature on any planet, anywhere in the cosmos, and I don't pretend to know how many other creatures elsewhere have embarked on civilization. I follow scientific news pretty closely, and I gather that we now pretty much know that the number of planets in this universe, given that we got billions of galaxies and the galaxies have billions of stars each, and a lot of them seem to have planets. I'm just imagining that as special as the Earth is, there got to be plenty of other places where it could happen. But I don't know anything beyond what the astronomers are saying about how many planets there are out there. And I know there are a lot of very special things about the Earth, but how special can it be? Any creature on any planet, anywhere in the cosmos, that embarks on the path of civilization, I say I can prove, will inevitably embark upon a social evolutionary process that they never would have chosen, but that they couldn't avoid. And that there's a social evolutionary force, a selective process, which results inevitably, regardless of the nature of the creature, in what I would call the spirit of the gangster, playing a disproportionate role in shaping that civilization's future. So it's also, I think, beneficial if it were to be widely understood, as widely as anything ever gets understood, that the human story is one of a creature fairly innocently, because of its creativity, plunging into a disordered situation that would drive its civilization to develop in ways that are destructive. Not only destructive, but a major force at work in shaping civilization, regardless of the creature's nature, is inevitably going to be destructive. It's just part of the implications of stepping across from the niche in which a creature evolved biologically to starting to open the gates to forming social forms, a new life form that was not shaped by natural selection over eons, but emerged out of the creative imagination of the various innovations and choices of human beings that are able to build things that never existed and that never got cleared through the processes that create the natural order, which is so protective of the long-term viability of what evolves. I'm not going to go further into that here, but there is further to go. We can see our situation more clearly. And isn't it pretty obvious that if humankind faces a challenge about getting our act together, that can be seen in terms of the inevitable play of forces that go on from because of embarking on civilization, that to understand the dynamics of the process we're in would make us more able to rein in the destructive force and to get the kind of human world that we would choose. I think you could tell that story, I think, improvisationally, that the better you understand the battlefield, more likely you are to win the battle. And this integrative vision explains, I think, a lot of the fundamental things about our situation. I don't claim that it tells us everything. I mean, for example, when it comes to this issue of AI that everybody's struggling over, I don't know if it's because I'm an old man and I didn't encounter these kinds of issues until I had already, reached late middle age or something like that. But I just don't know anything that I have to contribute to the AI question. And I do read about that stuff because, I'd like to know how that contributes to our ability to meet the challenge that we face. And I'd like to know how much it's part of the potential destructiveness. I mean, I look at the internet, for example. I remember when that first came in and all the utopian ideas that people had about what it was going to be like. Now, I love the internet, but the utopian visions have not been realized. I think it would be good if we understood what are the forces that are going to be at work that are going to shape the internet. A lot of them are commercial, and we've got to. I also don't have much insight into the whole social media issue, but I read and hear a whole lot about. There are some algorithms out there, and systemic dynamics and such that are having destructive effects upon the world. So it always helps to know what the forces are at play in the world, so that rather than just dreaming about getting to that better human story that we should be living on this planet, rather than just hoping that we could really understand the forces at play well enough to navigate our way to the desired destination. And I'm going to do a video talking more about that. The central challenge that any civilization creating creature would face, and how to start addressing that. It's not like I got the answers. I've got a couple of questions that, if you observe, that actually would, I think, get us started. It gets the process started. The process has got to be the one that we discover our way toward. And I can't see I didn't see this war in Ukraine coming a few years before it happened. I don't know what's going to happen over Taiwan. I didn't see this crisis in the Middle East. But you got to deal with the land, with the times that you're dealt, with some understanding of what basically you're trying to accomplish, with the goal that human civilization will survive on this planet rather than destroy itself. So that is sort of a foundational part to, there may be two parts to this integrated vision, two basic parts. From this one, certain other major ideas, concepts, assertions, I don't know what the right word is, also need to be brought into the secular worldview. The first one is that I think that I can show that there is a discernible reality that is reasonable to call a force of evil. Now, I define evil as a coherent force that consistently works to make things more broken. The thing is, you don't have to call it evil. The thing is that there is out of that other social evolutionary process to which I've alluded, but I prove it, but out of that, I can show that a coherent force does emerge out of that. A coherent force that consistently works to make things more broken, or to spread a pattern of brokenness. I do think that it is helpful to recognize that there is a force operating, and the coherence can be shown, and it acts a whole lot like evil has often been understood to be. And anyway, I try to show, and I do it like a social scientist, a coherent force, acting, being visible in the nexus of causes and effects. If you look at anything that's ugly and bad and destructive in the world, and you ask, well, what were the causes that brought that about? You will see that the causes of that were other forms of what you could define as brokenness, which has got to do with that which sort of makes the condition of life worse. It makes things worse. It's injustice, it's war instead of peace, it's hate instead of love. There's just a bunch of things you can look at where in one pair things are better in terms of human survival and human fulfillment, and the other thing that makes the world a place with more misery, more suffering, more trauma, more injury, more death. It's important to see that there is a coherent force there. And you can go see whether I show it and prove it, which I think I do. I'm sure that things are more complicated in this way and that way, but I think there's a big chunk of it that there is at work in our world, something that acts a whole lot like the force of evil used to be understood. You know, the people who had a religious point of view had a way of understanding evil. That was important in their worldview. I'm not sure exactly how they arrived at it, but it seems like they saw something like what I'm saying, I'm showing is actually out there. And when people left the traditional religious points of view that provided ways of understanding some of these things, like evil, they moved into a secular worldview where there really wasn't anything that one would call a force of evil. And I know this actually because I first essentially got into this force of evil business back in 2004. I will go into the experience that led me into that, but I then embarked on a mission of talking to liberal America about what I saw rising on the right. And so I had a lot of experiences with people of a secular worldview that really didn't like the idea of evil. First of all, they didn't like the idea. They thought that idea was primitive and misguided and full of superstition or something like that, because they thought that the idea of evil had to be, like the religious one. That was the one that that the culture had shown them, where you've got a devil with pitchforks and torments in hell and demons that make bad things happen, and they rejected that. I don't buy that either. But at this point, I tend to see that as a way of sort of, well, I don't know what it was, but it is a personification of something that I see and can show. So I think it would be important for people to be able to see such a thing. And I know that I can prove that too, because I have been watching how liberal America, which is basically animated with a secular worldview, the majority. I know that this secular worldview thing is a kind of a vague concept, and I don't mean to say that there's a single secular worldview, but I've encountered and been dealing with it pretty much my whole life, and I know some of the major components of it. I'm addressing them. There is in liberal America, if you talk about evil, you're going to get slammed. All the reasons people don't like it. Okay, I've been dealing with that, and I say, because people didn't have a way of seeing a coherent force that consistently works to make things worse, they did not see what was rising on the political right in America. They didn't see that this was not politics as usual nearly soon enough. There's a Sufi story about, am I going to be able to tell this? Anyway, there's a scholar, a wise man who's in this little hut in the wilderness, and he's deep into his spiritual thinkings, and there's a fly buzzing around him, and then every day the fly gets bigger and bigger, and the guy is not paying any attention. He doesn't see the danger. He doesn't see the signs that this fly is not just a fly. Well, liberal America didn't have any concept of what the thing that it was taking over the Republican Party was a thing for which the secular worldview did not have any concept. So I'm talking about major changes to the secular worldview. I'm trying to say I can supply that concept. This actually, America's political crisis at this time is best understood and best fought as a battle between good and evil. I feel quite certain about that. And I've been saying that in one way or another since 2004. But I worked for 20 years to try to understand this phenomenon of evil. First, I saw it, and then I investigated it, and then I came up with two ways of looking at it. One through the causes and effects. If some brokenness is a product of other forms of brokenness, and it is the cause of other forms of brokenness. And through all that, you can see a force moving through the system, a force of evil, a force that moves a pattern of brokenness through the human world in a shape-shifting way. It is visible. You can see it operating in the world. And you can also see it, and I'm not fully understanding just how this works, but occasionally there arises a pure case. I call it a pure case, because some actor in the world has been essentially fully taken over by something which has the result that everything to the extent to which everything that actor does makes the world in worse shape. And that's what I mean by a pure case. And I think that when I look at history, I don't have an abundance of examples of it because I just haven't studied history enough to be able to understand very many events deeply enough. But two cases of no, maybe three. No, three. The one I was going to use is the stock one, the Nazis. I think you can say, if you look at the totality of what brought that about, lots of brokenness. And, from the hyperinflation to World War I to the Versailles Treaty, brokenness begot Hitler, the Nazi regime, which begot a world war. Brokenness begets brokenness. The other area that I've studied in some depth, like a couple dozen books to get at the root of the thing, is the American Civil War. Or in that American Civil War, what chose that was the slave power. And I've looked deeply into the slave power, and I wouldn't say it was 100% a coherent force that consistently works to make things worse. But it was the source of a huge amount of brokenness. I mean, we have not yet recovered from the choice that the slave power made when Abraham Lincoln was elected. And if you look at what is it that created the slave power, a lot of that is quite ugly too. Anyway, I'm not going to go more deep, but the third thing is what's happened to the Republican Party since say 1990. I grew up with the Republican Party of Eisenhower and tricky Dick Nixon, but Ronald Reagan and the first Bush, and then something starts to change. The worst part of the party begins to take over the whole thing, and there was a sort of a confluence maybe instead of cause and effect, what you've got when you've got a pure case is that various rivers of brokenness come together. And in today's Republican Party, you can see that corporate greed and white racism, which are two of the major components of American brokenness through the centuries, are in alliance now under the rubric of the Republican Party. And during the Iraq War, I saw also that another dimension of American brokenness was being expressed in the war in Iraq. That Dick Cheney, for example, was channeling the spirit of American imperialism to give us what he arrogantly thought would be an easy walkover that would give us what's the expression, a cockpit, anyway, a key piece in a a region that's vital to American interests. The same spirit that came up with Manifest Destiny and justifying stealing land from the Native Americans. So I saw those things coming together, and that sets the time for my looking at what is this party doing and what are the effects of it. And we've gotten to the point where everything, I mean, I used to be able to point to some things they did that were, improved things even in a minor way. I can't see those in what they do or what they say. America would be in better shape if they hadn't done or said those things. It's I think, virtually completely consistent. They never are making anything better. The people I live among, I live in Trump country out here in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. They would feel that the Republican Party is the right party on these vital issues of abortion and the rights of citizens to bear arms. And that misreads what the Republican Party is doing. What the Republican Party is basically doing on both those issues is to assure that Americans will be at each other's throats over abortion and over guns as far as the eye can see. That is the fundamental brokenness of the whole thing. Those issues are used to keep the American people from joining hands to accomplish the things that are in to achieve their shared purposes. Abortion and guns are issues that are not relevant to the true nature of the power that's taken over the Republican Party. They're just using those to achieve a purpose which is plutocratic and fascistic. It's just right out there. I mean, there are people in the Republican Party who care about abortion, like Mike McCarthy. I don't doubt the sincerity of his theocratic insistence that everybody abide by his religious views, which I think are sincerely held, even if they're hypocritical. But we can see that we are not settling these issues and going on. We can remain pushed by the Republican Party to be focused on the things that divide us, the issues that can be used by a manipulative political force to impassion enough people to become one-issue voters over either guns or abortion, to embrace the Republican Party because they think that this is essential to protecting their deepest values. It's all so manipulative. It is a force of brokenness, disabling American democracy to clear the way for American fascism. So this is the other way of seeing evil. When forces come together, forces of brokenness of various kinds come together and make common cause in the realm of power, you can get things like the American Civil War, like the rise of the Nazi regime, and like today's Republican Party. These are all expressions of a coherent force that got unleashed when human beings stepped across out of the natural order into the disorder that civilization inevitably will entail from its first emergence. So basically, a force of evil rises with civilization, inevitably, not because of the nature of the creature, which is why I say the ugliness that we see in human history is not human nature writ large, because there is a force of evil that arises out of the systemic dynamics of civilization. But there are also, from a different dimension, a force of good. There is something inside us that has evolved, which is connected with a meaningful concept of the good. And this is the other dimension. I've been, most all of this is the product of my, of a new line of work of fairly recent years, which is to say, looking at what evolution has put into us, things that I'm calling experiential tendencies, that I say that are part of what we are. We're not born a blank slate. I mean, there's a lot of forming that's going to happen, but we're not a blank slate. We're born with certain experiential tendencies, I say. And the fact that we're born with them means that they've been life affirming. I mean, we wouldn't have them unless the ancestors that were developing these had an advantage in terms of getting their DNA into the future. This is the stuff inside us is sort of a projection, in a sense, about what works and what doesn't work in the evolutionary process, where where the name of the game is, can you get your DNA into the future? Well, our DNA has got various experiential tendencies built into it. It may not be as nearly as fully defined as some of the other things that are in our DNA, like all these neurotransmitters and stuff, skeletons and the emergence of teeth from our jaw bones. I mean, it may not be that specific, but it is there and it is meaningful, and it connects with the only thing that can mean anything. It connects with the only kind of good that there can be, which is that we are creatures among whose experiential tendencies is that we experience some things as better and some things as worse. We were shaped to feel that way because that helps motivate us to do what leads us to survive. Everything that is sort of obviously deep inside us, like the preference to be unhappy than to be miserable, we can infer is there because it was one of life's strategies to get a creature to do what the creature needed to do, get its DNA into the future. But we also experience things as better and worse. And that is where value enters into the cosmos. Because if there were nothing that felt anything, If there was nothing for whom one thing could be any better than the other, then nothing that had an experience that was positive, nothing could matter. I mean, you could imagine there could be a God who's pleased with the, but if there isn't even a God to be pleased with the light he just created, what difference does anything make? What difference could it make? Value is an emergent reality. It's not out there in the cosmos, which the secular worldview has tended to think, well, if it isn't out there in the cosmos, then it must be just merely subjective. Is anything that's in our experiential realm. Today's secular worldview treats as merely subjective, but that's a mistake. Yeah, there are subjective elements. Yeah, they're idiosyncratic, but we have as a species some experiential tendencies. And the route to the good, to the human world being good, is one where life continues rather than destroys itself. And life where the experience of life is a positive one and not a negative one. That's the good. And it is built into us. So that's part of the same thing. We have basically, we can show that we've got at the center of this, any civilization creating species, maybe there's a better way of saying that, but anyway, is going to have inevitably at the center of its drama after it breaks out into civilization, as the generations and centuries, or in our case, 10 millennia unfold. I lost my way. Another dimension of this is the capacity for spiritually transformative experience, which is built into the human genome. I think I can show that it's something that is widespread, which is the capacity to have such experiences. That is simply factual. Cross-culturally, through history, it's fairly widespread that people have these experiences, and they are impactful. And they come with the sense of there being spiritual truths. And basically, this evolutionary perspective of looking at what we are and inferring some things about what's good and what's not good, what's life-serving, which parallels the good, and what's life-degrading, which paralyzes, which connects with what's evil. In that dynamic, you've got something that looks very much like the battle between good and evil. And I think that it is useful to understand that, in a sense, we're dealing with two coherent forces that are at work in the human civilization that have been since from the beginning. The one that evolved, that is sort of aligned with life and with fulfillment, and then the one that emerged out of the systems that come up that promote the spirit of the gangster because of systemic forces. A battle between two forces, one that consistently works toward wholeness and the good, and one that continually works toward the brokenness and the evil. It's, I think, very valuable in terms of our ability to see to it that the forces that work toward wholeness prevail. I mean, that when I say that there's a toss-up whether in the next not so many generations human civilization will survive or destroy itself, survive for the long haul. When I say it's a toss-up, that means that we've really got to focus on which of those two forces is going to prevail. You can pretty well show that if we were to destroy ourselves, the potential explanations for why did that happen, like whether it's a nuclear holocaust because two massively armed nuclear armed nations got into a fight that ran out of control. That would have grown out of some kind of brokenness. And if we destroyed ourselves with things like climate change because we set up a world in which we couldn't respond to the challenge that has been visible to the world starting in the 1970s and especially in the decades since, and we've done so little to meet the challenge of climate change. If that's how we destroy ourselves, it will be the process of this force of brokenness that operated in various ways, like creating something like the fossil fuel industry. It is important for us to recognize that we are engaged in an inevitable battle between two coherent forces that would emerge with any civilization-creating species, and that would inevitably bring any civilization-creating species to to have to meet the central challenge that eventually any of them are eventually going to have the capacity to destroy themselves, because the power of the civilization is going to keep increasing indefinitely until it'll cross that line. And then the question will be, has it got itself ordered well enough to be reasonably sure that that scenario of self-destruction, which it's powerful enough to do, it is whole enough not to do. But we have not gotten to that point. We definitely have not. I think it's a hard thing to emerge out of our history and see things whole enough to be able to see the drama that we're involved with. Are we going to be one of those civilization-creating species that succeeds, that gets through the disorder and orders its world well enough, soon enough to avoid self-destruction? Or is it going to be one of those, I'm just imagining, those other ones. I mean, it's just imagination here. But I'm imagining that actually, if I had to bet, I would bet that there have been plenty of these, that the logic that I'm pointing to means that every one of them would have faced some kind of a challenge to get its act together before the forces of disorder and destruction that inevitably emerge are brought under control soon enough. I think that will have happened many places. Because after all, we're not the only species that sort of have been heading in the direction of greater creative intelligence. I mean, if we hadn't arisen, would some other species have emerged in the course of the following 10 million years or something like that? Civilization creating, well, maybe primates, but, maybe the elephants, I don't know. But is there the emergence of more tool use, more sophisticated communication seems to have been there, given enough time. Anyway, I'm imagining there would be two substantial populations of nations. And our secular worldview is right now too much putting us toward the group that I can imagine would have failed. I mean, we haven't really come to grips with the central challenge about what we need to be. I mean, I think it is perfectly obvious, first of all, that we're in danger of self-destruction. Secondly, that we're in danger of self-destruction because of the way the world is ordered. And thirdly, that the human future requires us to eliminate that danger fairly quickly with respect to either war or environmental destruction. So I think quite obviously we in the secular world should understand the nature of the challenge that we face for having created civilization enough to say we need to be asking ourselves first, what does our civilization need to become for it to survive for the long haul on this planet? And I'd like to add, and for human beings to have positive experience of their existence on this planet. And I also would want to add, and for the rest of the living planet to be in good shape also. But in a sense, that's implied, because if we're destroying our planet, we're not going to survive for the long haul. I mean, sustainability is a requirement of the success in that particular challenge match about are you going to get yourself in proper order in time. Our secular worldview needs to be asking, taking on the project of envisioning the world as it needs to be in time. We're not going to get there in time if we aren't even trying, if not even shooting for it. If we don't become the world we need to become, we will destroy ourselves. Why aren't we asking that question? And then the second question that fleshes it out, I mean, the second necessary step to make it a beneficial thing to have asked the question, what steps can we take now that are the wisest and most likely to be effective in moving us from where we are now to that future that we've envisioned that we need to get to? That'll produce a whole lot of conversations about, first of all, what should it look like? But those are conversations we should have. If there is ever going to be a good human future, we ought to envision it. You know, most science fiction movies that are set in the future, I don't like the way they look. Does anybody? I don't mean just your Blade Runner kind of disorder. You know, that's bad enough. But even when it's not Blade Runner and everything's clean and the people are running around in shiny little suits or whatever, it doesn't look utopian to me. I think that what we need is, it never seems to be there, is a deep meaningfulness of some kind. And how do we design a world in which people experience deep meaningfulness and fulfillment in their lives? We haven't envisioned that kind of a future. So, I mean, the task of envisioning a future is not just how do you prevent something like a Cuban Missile Crisis of '62 from threatening the survival of civilization, but how do we make it so that life is good? That's part of the challenge. But at a minimum, that we not destroy ourselves. But how do we? If we should always be thinking about what can we do now that would be most likely to be the path to getting to where we need to get to for human civilization to survive. I've imagined a cosmic historian who looks at these two populations of nations, the nations that failed to get it together and the nations that did, and asked like a social scientist would, what's the difference between, maybe he's not a historian, maybe he's a sociologist, social historian, I don't know. What are the characteristics of the societies that succeeded, and what are the characteristics of the societies that failed? I think that among them will be that they realized earlier rather than later what the nature of the challenge was that they faced. And that went together with realizing more fully than is the case now, I think, among humankind, what the nature of the situation was because of their having embarked upon the path of civilization. In other words, to understand the nature of the forces at play. Because it's one thing to ask the question, well, how do we get from here to there? But if you don't know the lay of the land and which way the wind's blowing and the water's flowing, you're not as likely to get from here to there as if you got good maps and you know the tendencies of things that need to be overcome. So for all those reasons, I think that we need some major changes in our secular worldview. Understanding our situation is one dimension of it, and embracing in a way that the secular world generally does not, the vital importance of two things that can be derived out of the experiential dimension, which is life affirming. One is the reality and the moral dimension, that it is real, it is important, and it is life-serving. And the spiritual dimension, which the evolutionary perspective shows isn't just some airy-fairy thing out there. It is an empirical, important reality that evolution has created that is real because there it is. People have these experiences. That is important. You can just see that these experiences are impactful on individual lives and impactful at the social and historical level. And life-serving because at least during the period in which this experiential tendency was instilled into our nature, those who were getting that capacity were surviving and having their pattern of DNA go on into the future more successfully than those who did not. Therefore, it was life-serving. That spiritual dimension is real, important, and life-serving. And both the sense of fulfillment of what feels better and what feels worse, and the sense of spiritual truth, the sense of this is what's important, or this is the ultimate level of our reality, those things are there to be listened to because evolution has told us it's better to have those experiences than not. You can just imagine this emerging among our hunting-gathering ancestors, because we can see shamans in Siberia and wizards in the Amazon, that this has been a dimension that has been of use to people. Well, our circumstances have changed a whole lot since then, but I think if you look at what people see and get in these spiritually transformative experiences, they are overwhelmingly pushing in the direction of wholeness. So I think that we can be critical of what we hear and try to, that's what I've spent my life doing. I've gotten certain deep experiences, 3 of them, maybe 4, in my since the first one in 1970. I take guidance from it. It has not led me wrong. It has confirmed to me that my listening to that voice in me is what I'm supposed to do. And I believe that to be true of everybody. And I don't know if everybody, I think that the statistics indicate at least a third of people have had such experiences that show that there are open places in themselves where something deep can happen. That's built into the pattern of what it means to be a human being, at least some human beings. And that we are best off not dismissing it like the secular worldview tends to do as, um, something archaic and passe. No, it's an important reality. That has to be, that we are best off being, drawing passions from. You know, uh, one of the reasons why this force of fascism has gained so much power in America is that so many with a secular worldview had not plugged into the spiritual place from which people have impact. It moves people, changes the course of their lives. There's a power there. And if liberal America had tapped into that more sooner, I don't think anything like Donald Trump could ever have come into being. There was a time when Gingrich and Limbaugh were, and then Fox News, and the Democrats never thought there was a battle that needed to be fought. If you are in touch with your spiritual passions, you see the poison, the spiritual poison that someone like Rush Limbaugh was putting into the American bloodstream. You will feel something about it, you will do something about it, and liberal America didn't. The secular worldview really needs to open up to the spiritual dimension and to the moral dimension, not as something merely subjective, but as a real, important, and life-serving pair of realities. Thanks. That's one way of sharing what my life is about, discovering about the human situation. There is a important story that should be part of our self-understanding. It will make it easier for us to believe in ourselves and to feel compassion to the humankind that's the fruit of this broken world. There are better things to encounter broken people with than hatred. Well, thank you for listening. Bye-bye.